I had lived in Fortaleza for a long time, but at that time, I didn't know everything yet. I was getting used to the neighborhoods, the culture, and the staff. My friend Ricardo, who was always the most excited in the group, lived calling me to leave. He said that the best in town was dawn, that bars and parties never slept, and I, a little naive, accepted. It was on a hot Friday of November that he appeared at home, smiling as if he had just won the lottery, saying he had discovered an old ball with orchestra and everything. He said it was something different from the modern parties that we attended, and that the social costume was mandatory. I found it weird, but I widened. He and 3 friends, Bruno, Tatiana, and Elisa, we got ready and took a taxi to the address, which was in a half-forgotten corner of the city, in a very old building, according to Ricardo, famous in the days of our grandparents. As soon as we stopped, I came to mind that the place was too old to have a party happening. The facade looked like another century, full of carvings in the wood, but already peeled and unsuccessful. There was a sign out on the door, almost illegible lyrics. "Is it right here?" Bruno asked suspiciously, to which Ricardo answered, laughing, "Of course it is. Look at the people coming in." And in fact, men of suit and women in long dresses were going through the entrance. The stranger is that there was no song from inside, only steps and a muffled murmur, as if everyone talked in whispers. Elisa frowned, finding everything very weird, but we were already there, tidy, so we decided to enter. The hall was huge, with a gigantic chandelier right in the center, shining as if it had been polished that same day. The wooden floor reflected the yellow lights of the chandelier, hanging around. The smell mixed mold and exaggerated perfume of those period. The orchestra played something that resembled an old, slow and cadenced bolero, different from what we expected from a party. People danced so rhythmic, with unchanged smiles, that they looked like actors in a movie. The men drove with elegance, the dresses swirled, but there was something strange. Although the lips smiled, their eyes remained empty, disconnected from the rest of their face. Bruno came close to me and whispered, "Dude, it's very weird." Ricardo, on the other hand, took a glass of drink and laughed, calling our paranoia. Then he invited a girl with a champagne dress to dance. She seemed to that salon, but when she quickly turned, I swear I saw her skin transparent for a moment, as if below her was something dark. I felt a chill. Tatiana pulled me and said, "Let's go." But when we tried to look at the door, the exit seemed to be gone. The hall seemed to grow like in a nightmare, and the entrance was no longer where we remembered. Suddenly, the orchestra stopped. The silence was so sudden that the air seemed denser. One by one, all the dancers stopped at the same time and turned toward us. That empty look, now clearer, revealed 2 pale faces, some with greenish or bluish shades, as if they no longer had blood circulating. One of them opened his mouth, but no sound came out, just a cold breath that made me shiver to my soul. We ran, but we didn't know where. The door was completely disappeared. The windows were covered with huge, heavy curtains that looked like stuck to the wall. It was as if the whole building turned into a maze. Back there, the people, or whatever they were, advanced slowly with that cold smile. Ricardo shouted by the name of the champagne dress, but she no longer looked like before. The face now displayed deteriorated strokes. That's when I looked into the mirror at the bottom of the salon and noticed that we had no reflection. None of us. My heart fired. If the mirror did not reflect us, what did that mean? "Run!" shouted Tatiana, pulling my arm. We tried to open several doors, but all gave to the same hall, cluttered with spectral dancers who seemed to mock our affliction. It seemed that the whole place played with us, keeping us prisoners. Suddenly, Ricardo shouted. I turned and saw the girl in a champagne dress grabbing his arm. Her skin was so thin and translucent that upon squeezing it, her fingers seemed to merge to her flesh in an indescribable horror. Ricardo's scream echoed, and the other creatures also approached, always with that frozen smile. I felt we wouldn't escape. Then Bruno, in a moment of despair, ripped one of the wall and threw him into the floor. The fire spread fast, and the hall soon began to be taken by the flames. The creatures retreated, not out of fear, but because they began to become even more in the face of heat. The skins melted like a candle, revealing skulls and darkened bones where there were once countenance. Still, they kept smiling. That's when I noticed. If we stayed more time, we would be devoured by that fire with them. The hall began to be full of smoke, and I had the impression that everything was distorted, as in a delirium. So, out of nowhere, the door reappeared. We don't think twice. We ran out, feeling the warmth of the flames behind the back, the murmurs of those beings mixing with the crack of the burned wood. As he stepped on the street, we came across an empty, silent place. The hall now seemed abandoned, dark, as if no one frequented it for decades. We ran away without looking back, without saying a word. The next day, Ricardo swore that he would return there to prove that it was all about hallucination. However, when we arrived at the address, there was only a wasteland, full of bush, no sign of salon or fire. We never talked about it again. But whenever I hear any old music, a shiver takes over me. And sometimes, when I pass the center at night, I swear I hear an echo distant from orchestra, resonating at a ball that never ended. If you have gotten here, remember to enjoy the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave it in the comments from where you are. Carnival in Cordova is another story. For those who have been, you know what I'm talking about. The narrow streets saw a sea of people, everyone jumping and drinking until no longer, following blocks, laughing loudly without worrying. But there are those who know the dark side of the place, full of legends and murmurs of the past that insist on remaining. That day we discovered the worst way. It was Carnival Saturday, and me, Fabio, and João were early in the revelry. We had arrived in the morning, dropped our backpacks in a republic of acquaintances, without planning much, just following the flow, laughing at the absurdity of the crowds. But around 10 in the night, everything changed. We were walking down a slightly empty street out of the main boil when Fabio poked my shoulder. "Hey, look at that woman there." Ahead, stopped in the curb, was a girl with a purple dress, smile from corner of mouth, a hypnotic and at the same time uncomfortable expression. It didn't seem to fit in there. Everyone sweaty, fantasized and impeccable, as if it had come out of a distant time. No one else noticed it, just us. Gradually, she turned and went into a dark side, dark, leaving that trail of curiosity. Fabio, crazy to pull the subject, has been running, shouting, "Hey girl, where are you going?" She didn't answer. She just continued. I felt a weird shiver, but I couldn't stop him. John looked at me with an air of doubt. We entered the street, where the shadows projected on the old facades, and the carnival music seemed to disappear. That seemed another city. No soul passed by. The girl in the purple dress was going on, steps so light that she was barely heard. I just wanted to go back, but it seemed something forced me to continue until she stopped. We stayed real estate. She turned to us with that even bigger smile, but when she tried to speak, her voice didn't come out. It looked like the whole street choked the sound. Then the lights blinked and failed. At the last moment of clarity, she was just no longer there. The pitch took over. The silence was made. I felt my heart wanting to jump my mouth. Fabio asked softly, "Where's her?" No one answered. And suddenly we heard something that looked like a sinister laugh, far away. The city stood upside down. The walls became more oppressive. The floor stones looked too old. We had a feeling we were stuck in a nightmare. John was the first to react, taking a step back with wide eyes. "This is not normal people, man," he whispered. I just wanted to disappear, but Fabio was still hypnotized, looking around as if he looked for the girl. It was then that she appeared again, but was changed. The perfect skin seemed disfigured, the back and dull eyes. He looked straight at us and I felt unbearable pressure on my chest, as if something crushed inside. What does she want? Fabio was without reaction, looking like someone else. John was pale, about to pass out. The girl approached, and the street seemed to close even more. It hardly breathed. When I thought we would be swallowed by that presence, it disappeared again, as fast as it arose. The lights blinked again, and the carnival revelry reappeared abruptly, distant but audible. Again, people emerged as if nothing had happened. We stayed there confused, trying to understand if it was real or hallucination. It was never clear. To this day, when I remember that smile and that disappearance at night, I feel chills. Fabio and João do not like to touch the subject either. Perhaps she still goes the shadows of the narrow streets of Cordova, waiting for those who dare follow her. We spent the rest of that haunted dawn. I tried to convince myself that it had just been a piece of imagination, but no one could go back to the party mood. When we ran the day, we returned to the place where it all happened. It was full of people, salespeople, drinks, and a joy that seemed to mock our memory. The girl with the purple dress has never been seen again. I don't know who she was or what it was. I just know that after that night, nothing was the same again. Fortaleza has always had its legends. Since childhood, I hear people telling reports of penalty souls and apparitions on deserted streets, but no story compares to what is said about the figure of the gold mask. I didn't even believe it to see with my own eyes. It was at the 1988 Carnival. I was about 19 years old and left without fear, made everyone. In Lago do Sol, it was pure mess, confetti, foam, drink. A block passed and we went after it, when suddenly I noticed a very peculiar subject, black suit, well aligned, and a shining mask that covered half of the face. I didn't dance, just watched. That gave me goosebumps. He seemed to see everyone, but in a way that could not be explained. When someone drunk wanted to take a wave, he touched the masked shoulder and was paralyzed at the same time, as if he had been sucked. It fell to the pale floor, unable to speak. And the masked gone away soon after. No one knew how to say how he disappeared or where he went. From there, I began to see that figure at various points in the revelry, as if it were omnipresent, and no one else seemed to notice him. My friends and I ran aimlessly, trying to escape from that disturbing vision, but wherever we were, there was the gold mask, stopped, shining in the light of the posts. At one point, we saw two identical figures at the same time, on the same street, as if they were replicas. Juliana, one of the girls who was with us, started to get sick. It was pale, unable to breathe properly, just like the drunk before. Then we realized, terrified, the presence of the mask between the shadows. I was sure that this was not human. We managed to escape to a busy street where the song was still happy. But for us, the party was over. All we wanted was to get home. Then a mysterious lady, sitting near a street vendor, called us softly, asking if we had seen him too. We sat next to her, completely goosebumps, and she said that that appearance returns every carnival, multiplying to torment those who cross her way. He sees who sees him, she said, and he finished with a simple warning, don't face much, but he takes you. This phrase echoes in my head to this day. After that night, no more at the streets of Fortaleza during Carnival. I prefer home safety. I live in the village of flowers almost all my life. I've been through bizarre situations, but nothing that compares to what I witnessed at the 2011 Carnival. That party started normal, full of blocks, noise, and costume people. I, with no reason to worry, enjoyed it. It was in Santa Paula, in the old hills, that I spotted a woman dressed in Colombina. At first, I thought it was just another fantasy, But as I approached, I realized something different. She was still, without interacting with anyone, and no one seemed to notice her. When I looked straight, her eyes were back, empty, and emitted a sadness so great that my stomach rolled. She moved like a trance and went on, not understanding why. Batucada's sound began to look away, and a muffled cry broke into the street. I looked around and didn't see who cried, even stopping very close to the woman. She lifted the mask, showing a too pale face, and whispered, "He will never find me." At that moment, it disappeared out of nowhere, as if it were never there. The whole revelry came back in a matter of seconds, but I was feeling that I was lacking air. I asked my friends if they had seen that woman, but no one knew anything. I tried to resume the fun, but could no longer. I came home with that voice echoing in my mind, and to this day, I don't know if it was a lost soul or something else. I only know that since then, I avoid going through the same point at night. Legend has it that a Colombian wanders there, seeking someone who will never come, and I never thought a block named "Kiss Me That I'm From the Village" could become the scene of a nightmare. It was 2012, and I used to go down the hills, following that sea of animated people. But everything changed when I noticed a man wearing black mask, dancing almost supernaturally in the crowd. He went from one group to another without difficulty, as if teleport. No one thought it was strange except me, who started to feel chills. At one point, he stopped in the middle of the street and stared at me. A silence formed, drowning the sound of samba. The mask seemed to smile, even without expression for it. He walked toward me, and I had the impression that everything around it darkened. I felt as if we were alone on a ghost street. His voice, which came from nowhere, sounded in my head, "Do you know who I am?" I was paralyzed, unable to react until he began to move again, distorting himself in a shadow. Suddenly he disappeared, and I saw that the party had returned to normal, people jumping and singing as always. But I knew it was not hallucination. For weeks I had nightmares, and even today, when I see someone with a black mask, I feel I can relive that terror. Not long after, something was sinister in Olinda. Not the same Olinda as before, but a historic region of the interior. They say a woman appears there with a blood-covered face, never explaining why she is in that condition. It was 1962, the Carnival was in full swing, and I saw this figure pass among the revelers without anyone paying much attention. I thought it was part of the fantasy, but when it came close, I realized it was not ink. The blood looked dry, almost glued to the skin. She stared at me with empty eyes. I got my legs wobbly, and my friends also retreated, scared. Then she went to a side street. Suddenly, he let out such a sharp cry that he silenced the band for a few seconds, a scream of ancestral pain, as if the city had kept that lament for decades. No one knew what to do, and when we realized, the woman was gone. But the air was still heavy, and for a moment I thought I saw its figure at the end of the street, lurking. But when I blinked, I was no longer there. I returned home shaken, and to this day, when I hear any drum beat, I remembered that scream that made the world stop. It was supposed to be the best carnival of all in Bahia. The streets of Salvador become pure joy, and I, like many, entered the party without fear. But a certain excerpt from the circuit was calmer after the block passed, leaving the empty street. Gradually, the fog arose out of nowhere. Very thin at the beginning, but it was thickening until we can hardly see ahead. My friends and I heard steps, but there was no one, until shadows began to appear, hooded, moving strangely, as if they danced without rhythm. They emanated a presence that left us terrified. The air was dense, almost breathable. At one point, one of the figures came right before me, pointing with a deformed arm. I felt the soul freeze. We tried to run, and as we ran, the fog seemed to follow us. I looked back and saw several of them, silent movements following our steps. As we approached an illuminated avenue, it all disappeared. The fog dissipated, the laughter and the accès echoed again in the air, as if the night had not been interrupted. I never passed by after dusk. Sometimes in dreams, I hear those steps echoing, and I feel that the hooded shadows still surround Salvador, hoping that the fog will return. If you have come to the end of these reports, leave your like, make your comment, and subscribe to the channel not to miss any of my stories. Oh, and watched so far, send a ghost emoji in the comments so I know that you are one of the brave who endured to hear everything. And if you want to be part of our class and have access to exclusive content, become a member of the channel. Its participation further strengthens this community of explorers of the unknown.